Rashaad Penny, the Dynasty League winner in 2021. That and more this week on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, we've been waiting for it for 4 years. Here we are, Rashaad Penny, top of the fantasy mountain.
Yeah, the playoff stats, exactly as we would have predicted it, and exactly as we went full heavy RB at the beginning of the season. Rashaad Penny is running back one, tied with Devin Singletary with 58.4 points per game. 58.4 points in weeks 15 through 17. Tied for 1 and 2 at 19.5 points per game. Exactly like we would have predicted it, just ahead of Justin Jackson. With Joe Mixon, David Montgomery, and Sony Michel rounding out the top 6 in points over the last 3 weeks of the fantasy season. Exactly like people were banging the drum for running backs early because you can't win championships without running backs. Exactly like they predicted. Oh, wait. Not so much.
Not so much. Yeah, and running back one in the fantasy title game in week 17. How does this taste? 4 years of his career, and he put up 35% of his rushing yardage for his entire career in the past month, and that included a stinker game. Running back.
Can you repeat that number?
35% of his 4-year career rushing yards came in the last month of time. So Rashaad Penny finally healthy. He's a bowling ball with legs. He can do some damage there, and it reminds me of Sony Michel. Sony Michel went through a swoon of he can't stay healthy, you won't stay healthy, changing teams, needs an injury. We'll never know if Rashaad Penny needed Alex Collins out of the way. We will never know that. But that certainly helped. Chris Carson out of the way early in the season, that certainly helped. But 3 top 10 finishes, 2 in the top 3 over the final month for Rashaad Penny. And he is a poster child for just going volume running back, because Penny would be a profile you wouldn't run away from, because it's the cost of a roster spot. When you get to 2021, that was the cost. Like, all it means is I have to sit here and do nothing and hope he is healthy at some point in time. And you know what? I hope he becomes a little baby Leonard Fournette. I hope that people think injury prone, and he puts together a year or 2 years where he doesn't miss much time. I can't wait to see if that occurs. Rooting for him.
Yeah, he produced more than double his classmate there, right? Him and Barkley came out together, and more than doubles him over the fantasy season, so over the fantasy playoff. So, yeah, I mean, again, this is just a testament. This works, right? You this year it's Penny. Other years it's been Raheem Mostert or Damian Williams. I mean, we could have inserted this name a couple years ago and this exact same conversation and just bleeped out Rashaad Penny and put Damian Williams and release the same podcast and some of the same stuff, right? I mean, this is something that just happens over and over again. And a volume running backs, elite quarterbacks, right? These are formulas that are tried and true that work. And especially in Superflex, especially in Dynasty, when you sort of use the advantage of having high-end quarterbacks and use a lot of running backs. And again, it's not. I think the lesson to learn from this too is that it's not necessarily what if we're drafting right now for 2022, which will commence soon. It's not necessarily the bets that we're going to make now are going to be the ones that turn out for week 17. A year from now, but it is that you're making the right types of bets, right? You're taking the right types of bets, and then we're constantly updating, and that's something that I think we've done well, really adjusting to, which is constantly updating our running back depth charts and our running back
probabilities. Yeah.
Yes.
Just the calculus of, this guy's a 5% shot versus a 3% shot. This is 10 versus an 8. This is a better profile. So I'm going to long hold this guy. Options like that. Wes says in the chat, thanks so much for a successful season. Just won another championship last night with a huge assist from Footballguys. Thanks so much. And congrats, Wes. And a good question from Titus,
It's a great question.
Yeah. I mean, how many on a given 25-player roster? So if we're assuming one quarterback, so by the design of the question, what's sort of a benchmark, an easy multiplier or benchmark that you would use for running back?
It matters how many receivers you have to start. Is I think where I would start with that question, right? So if I have to start 2 or 3 wide receivers, maybe I'll roster 1 or 2 more than that is the most that I'll roster, right? So 4 or 5 wide receivers is probably the most I'm really going to roster. I'm going to go elite and concentrated at that position. I'm not going to roster a ton of backup quarterbacks or tight ends, right? So assuming one quarterback and one tight end requirement, it's a non-super flex, non-tight end.
You're just zooming through that. Like a lot of people are comfortable having one quarterback and one tight end on their roster.
I mean, we could go through it. I mean, and we probably should.
But these are big mental hurdles for people to get over.
Totally.
I just wanted to stop there because a lot of people might have 2, 3, 4 quarterbacks in that depth, and I just that can be hurdle number one.
And it was down the stretch, and so like I think different times of the year matter too, right? I didn't want to get stuck with a COVID issue in week 17, right? So I did roster two quarterbacks. I did roster, I doubled up. I handcuffed where necessary, and then I let him float back when when the ball was about to kick off, right? I cut the backup quarterback and did those sorts of things. But, generally speaking, I don't and start one quarterback and start one tight end. I might roster 3 total of those positions at any given point. And then it leaves me a lot of room to roster running backs. So I think, in that calculus, we're talking, 15 running backs is something that we could absolutely attain. And that would be something that I would be willing to do. 2x over the wide receivers is an absolute, I think, a minimum. And then I think you can do more than that if you're elite enough at wide receiver.
You're scaring people, Jordan. I'm going to start with the freshman 101 class here, because we are talking in a good cross section of dynasty GMs, because I see it across the leagues. So I'm going to say this is the 1.0 level of achievement. Like a video game where you get, I achieved this badge or this award or whatever, and then you end up scaling up as you go. You can get your coins or whatever, and you buy a bow and arrow. I don't know how it works anymore. That's how it worked with Zelda, I believe, 30 years ago. But go buy an arrow or an elixir. I think you could go buy the elixir from the big tree stump store. Is how it worked. But I would say this: at a minimum, have the same number of running backs at wide receiver. Let's start there, Jordan. Let's start small.
Okay. All right.
So there's plenty of people that have double the wide receivers as running backs. So let's at least fix that. Because I did a lot of study, I think it was 1 to 2 years ago, and it was amazing the difference in high-level finishes when you had a bunch of running backs or just being running back heavy versus the teams that were wide receiver heavy. So I would start with 1.0. Look at that ratio. And so not to get into numbers, because it might vary, as you said, with tight ends and quarterbacks in various times of the year. But, look at that 1.0, and I would say shoot for, start working your way towards 1.25, 1.5. And I think over time, you start pulling the Band-Aid off a little bit. You feel the hairs start pulling, and you're like, but it will become more comfortable, and you won't feel it anymore when you start not drafting or dropping wide receivers and gravitating towards running back just a little bit more over time. So this isn't something where I would just walk right now and drop 5 wide receivers and, the first waiver cycle, pick up four running backs just because we said so. But I would make a plan of like, by the time the rookie draft is over, here's what I'm looking, like let's move a couple, 2 or 3 in that direction. By week 1, can we move another couple in that direction? So I would look at it in that benchmark over the next 8 to 9 months, and I wouldn't do it like in graphic fashion, because it would probably make you feel very uncomfortable. But the offseason of an existing team is the perfect time to do this, where you can shop players at wide receiver, try to maybe trade a wide receiver for a running back or for a pick upgrade, whatever. You have a lot of options where week 9, week 11, you may not have as many avenues to try to fix these things.
Yeah, and this is pick up an orphan team and do this exercise, right? Because then you have no commitment to anyone on the team. That's a great way to do it as well, to sort of do this. But yeah, I think getting to more, and what you'll see is you'll be open to more of these opportunities as you roster more running backs. You'll be open to more of these opportunities. You'll have more exposures to guys like Darrell Williams, to guys like Rashaad Penny, right? To if you had the the will to start Devin Singletary, maybe him, or Damian Harris, or some of these other guys that would be further down that you would have along the way have taken a wide receiver ahead of. These are guys that make differences down the stretch of your league, and it's really tough to predict when the receivers will. It's not that hard to predict when the running backs will. It's much easier to predict when the running backs will, I guess I should say, and it makes a difference, big time.
Yeah, and Wes also added, can you ever have enough running backs? And I would say when you get to the point where you a couple weeks in a row per se, because a guy's out, and he moves to IR and you have to pick up a streamer for that 1 week at wide receiver. I had that situation in a couple leagues. That's when you're sort of at the max and you already have, say, one quarterback. So that's sort of the legal limit for the format, if you will. But I would pay attention more to that ratio a little bit. And Jordan outlined, if it's 2 or 1 or 3 starting wide receivers mandatory, that impacts things as well. So going beyond, and having a little bit of buffer. But there are times with IR designations and things like that, I was literally down to the number of wide receivers for that week. And then things would have got dicey on a Saturday or Sunday where, okay, I need one more. So I'm more apt to floating that wide receiver 3 spot for the 1 week of, well, I'll just start this guy. Maybe it's not the most optimal, but if it means I have to drop a running back that I really don't want to, I don't think it's going to make a graphic difference in this random mid-season week. So those are the sort of value judgments you start making. But the first thing is getting more comfortable with this allocation on your roster.
Yeah, and I think the big question that I would ask and think really hard about this, and I don't say this with sarcasm or any sort of ill will, but the receiver that you're rostering on the back end of your roster, how do they make a difference for you? Right? I mean, literally start with that question. Tell me the story about how they make a difference, right? If it's a 3rd or 4th string wide receiver, like how do they make a difference? And when are you ever going to feel comfortable starting them? You know what I mean?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people feel much more confident than we do in starting ancillary wide receiver on an NFL depth chart X, Jordan.
Yeah, that could be true, but I think when you look at it, they're unlikely to make a difference, right? And you can really pick the weeks where you could start the running backs. It's a lot harder to pick the weeks when you could start a wide receiver. For example, like I have tried this experience with Marquez Valdes-Scantling. It is very difficult to get it right because in theory it should work, right? Like he's one that the wide receiver 2 without a whole lot of other weapons in the receiving game, and he should be the one that it should work with, right? And it like
with a strong quarterback, but yet it doesn't work.
Right.
There's so many weeks that you put up 3 and you put up 6 and you put up 9, and it's like I played this dance the whole season. What I love is my fantasy league. You can actually go in and there's there's an option in there where you can look up starter points. So it literally looks at how many times you started player X and what their points per game was when you actually started them. This goes beyond. This is actual utility and impact for your teams. So when you stream a position, how good were you? When you play these dance games and you don't actually have the horses at wide receiver, you're playing these rotational committee games. How good were you? And you might look at there, and what's really bad is some of these players might be 11 points per game on the season. And when you look at the aggregate game, you'll go, oh, he's pretty good. He was wide receiver 42 or whatever that is. But then you go and you look, well, I started him 3 times and he averaged at 8. So obviously you weren't very good at that. That player, that position, the whole mess. And just that's the problem. If you don't have the guy of a passing game, it makes it tough. It makes it tough to predict. I know, because even guys like Cole Beasley or Emmanuel Sanders, or you mentioned Marquez Valdes-Scantling, wide receiver 2s on good offenses with good quarterbacks, it still is tough. And they're going to blow up a few times, and it's going to make their annual aggregate points look a lot better. But trying to, as you said, close your eyes and shoot it, and hit the horse's tail. Good luck on pinning that. All right, this is Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 85 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show, and still sponsored this week by Props Fantasy. It's super easy to join. You can sync your teams from Sleeper and Yahoo, create a challenge, and we're getting ready for Week 18. Your fantasy season, your Dynasty season is over. So you can get on Props Fantasy, crown yourself another champion. It's a week-to-week game. And again, you can import and sync your existing rosters and teams. That registration gives you a chance for a signed Aaron Rodgers helmet. More challenges you enter, the more chances you have to win. So that's propsfantasy.com/guys to cash in. We got some trades, and we're going to live in 2 realities this week. We got one that actually occurred before finals there on Sunday/Monday of week 17. And now we're full off-season mode, Jordan. We're going to have for days now, for months on end, we're going to be able to talk about off-season dynasty trading and team building. So let's start with week 17. So let's talk about the concept here, and then we can also talk about the outcome. Cordarelle Patterson was traded to a team in the finals. which means no trade deadline in their leagues. You can supplement your team all the way up until kickoff, trying to go for the title. Patterson was traded for Michael Thomas for a team not in the finals. What are your thoughts on maybe no trade deadline? What are your thoughts on making moves to supplement your lineup in a specific week of the playoffs like this? And then what do you think about the trade in general?
So here's I had faded Patterson a little bit down the stretch. There were some leagues where I had depended on him early and wasn't playing him down the stretch just because he didn't have that upside. So he probably wouldn't have been the guy I would have done this with. And I think like if you probably could have gone a different route, right? You could have, and this is again going back to the roster construction thing. You don't have to give up a potential core wide receiver to do this when you're rostering Darrell Williams, when you're rostering Jarrett Patterson, who was readily accessible in most leagues for a long time. When you're rostering Rashaad Penny, right? This is what you don't have to do. You don't have to spend a core wide receiver on a stopgap running back for a 1 week setting, right? Then this is the danger of this trade is he scores 7.1 fantasy points, right? Heck, you could have had Mike Davis and he outproduced him, right? That's the I don't like doing these types of trades to fill a playoff hole where it's not a core guy. You're giving up a core guy for a non-core guy. You're going in the wrong direction. And you're trying to thread a needle. It's really tough to do. So I don't
the needle's
like
1 week.
Generally.
The needle's 1 week too. That's the problem.
Correct.
Like you didn't make this trade in week 11 and you're saying I'm trading for Patterson to make my run. So maybe you didn't expect to get to the finals. Maybe you had an unexpected absence in week 17 and now you're freaking out. Now you think, and the other thing I would say is, again, work within that 60-40 spectrum. Like if you're an underdog, you're probably not lower than 40%. If you're a favorite, you're probably not above 60%. And so more often than not, I just status quo. I say, I got here. I'm going to make the best lineup I can, but I'm not the type to do a deal like this, and I'm usually not the type to do a deal like this in week 15 either. So even with no deadline, and I've generally seen not a ton of trades in leagues with no deadline. Why? Because you have the risk of doing this. What if that doesn't make a difference? And generally, unless Patterson went for 20 plus. Or 25 plus or 30 plus. And you still have to have it within that differential to say, yes, he made the difference and I won the title because of him. If you win in a blowout, he didn't matter at all. If you lose in a blowout or he didn't score all that well, you could have A, lost because of him, or B, it didn't matter on the other end. So that's why I don't, and Patterson is over 30. He had a magical year of someone finally unlocking him. Is he going to get magical usage again next year? He's also at an age where you say, even with low mileage in his career, really? Perfect storm again? We're going to run this back? He's a very risky player. And he was on the waiver wire in August.
He's basically this year's version of Mike Davis, right? Late career breakout guy from last year who got optimized because of situation and now we head into the offseason and no one's going to respect that, right? It's funny that they're teammates playing on the same team because they're very similar in terms of the way I think the market's going to treat them. And the other way I would look at this too is like you are giving up the chance for a long-term difference. I think this is such a good trade for the person. This is exactly this we're putting together a good theme unintentionally here, but a question that people will ask, hey, if you're not rostering a lot of wide receivers, like how do you sort of build out a team? Like don't they age out? No, you do these sorts of things, right? You take these sorts of shots. You take shots on depressed assets, and you do it by selling off depth like this. This is exactly how you do it. So, I think this is a great trade for the person getting Michael Thomas because you're making a great bet. This is a great trade for that person.
Well, yeah, and no trade deadline. I could argue that there's a lot more benefit to the teams out of it because you can continually week by week shop the players that you view as non-core assets, but yet they're productive, yet they have roles for now. And yes, they can help a contender. They may not, but they could have an expiration point as early as the season ending because everyone recalibrates the offseason and the next most meaningful game is 8-9 months away. So that makes it tough. But, Patterson, if you weren't able to get it done by week 11, 12, 13, a lot of leagues close up shop. But if it's open the whole time, Now that injury in the playoffs or that team that's getting a little edgy because they're a underdog, they are willing to make a move late like this. And for all the concern potentially with Michael Thomas, I mean, if he's healthy and he's playing, he's probably the alpha for his depth chart. He's probably the number one. And with Cordarelle Patterson, you cannot charge that statement at all. So that's, I mean, there's a huge ravine, a differential here, huge cavernous divide between these two players in terms of their allegiance. And Thomas is no spring chicken himself, venturing closer to 30. So, but yeah, so that's the last trade we will be covering of in-season mode here for 2021. On to the off-season. And how about Saquon Barkley? How appropriate. We're going to start with Saquon Barkley. So you figure the market's falling. Henny penny. Here we go on Saquon Barkley. The question is, how far? I imagine, you know what? We're going to have a theme. At least like once or twice a month, we're going to have the Jordan, is this a good exit on Saquon Barkley? Right. It's like the Patrick Mahomes.
Like Did you get enough? Yeah,
exactly. That was the theme. The Superflex Patrick Mahomes question was the offseason question of 2021. Now it's going to be Saquon Barkley. So half PPR, one quarterback. Did they get enough for Saquon Barkley? Literally a day after the fantasy season ends, they're like, I need to get this guy who got outproduced in a decent chunk of the season by Devontae Booker off of my roster. Saquon Barkley for AJ Dillon and 109, because now we know draft position.
Yeah. By the way, how I was watching that Green Bay game, and it was like, all right, you got this 240-pound guy. He's running, and it feels like 1 degree outside. Like no one wants to tackle.
No one wants to tackle shoulders and knees on this one.
We're out of the playoffs. Like, just no mod.
Business decision. Hot, cold tub. All right.
I mean, listen, I love AJ Dillon, but it's got to be Barkley, right? I mean, and I'm looking to pivot off of Barkley. The problem with this pivot is I don't think you're getting.
You still got to get someone that, yes. I mean, we're team Dillon, but let's face it, Aaron Jones until he isn't going anywhere,
right?
So that's going to be a committee that, I mean, if you get the Jones injury in any particular and absence any particular week, you're golden.
Right.
But that's not a guarantee. Like you would like to get I'm very confident of a week 1 and forever as long as he's healthy starter. How high does that first need to be? The answers vary in this type of deal, but I would say how low? 102? 102?
Yeah, it's. I mean, because then you just put like, where is that person going to go? Right, like if you look at Barkley, he's going to be a top 30 guy, even in in start 1, right? And then you say, okay, if that's the range that he's going in, that's the range historically of 102, right? That's sort of in the range which you would expect him to be. And then you say, okay, what is this, a good class or a bad class, right? I think people tend to think this is bad class, and then you're basically selling something below him, right? That's kind of how I would do the math on that.
And Barkley's not really at risk of, I hope they don't sign somebody. I hope they don't draft someone meaningful. Like he's not really in that camp. We can say that he's not on the same trajectory he was 24 months ago.
Right.
But the whole his job security is at risk at present. We are not there.
Right. And I think you got a number of things that can happen that can improve his quote value in trade respects. Through the offseason, if they change quarterbacks, if they change offensive coordinators, heck, they could fire Joe. Like there's a variety of things that could happen along the way that could change his impression. That doesn't include him taking a snap. That I think could improve his value. So I wouldn't bail on him. Like this wouldn't be the way I would bail. I would use him in a different way to go up. Like in Superflex, I would use him to bridge from a good quarterback to a great quarterback. That would be a deal that I would do.
How about you get yourself a core wide receiver? Like maybe you have 2 right now, and you were, kind of playing the field with wide receiver 3, 4 on your roster. How about if you just lock that thing up, airtight, because that might create an extra roster spot for you. So if you go Barkley and you get into a high strata with an auto start weekly wide receiver, then again, you might be going upward in points per game, and you might have gotten a plus on top, maybe. And now you free up potential roster spots as well. So
who would that be? Like,
I know.
does
I knew you were
DJ
going
Moore
there.
qualify? Like, is DJ Moore that? Like,
I think you can probably. Maybe
you
I'm
think you think you could get DJ Moore for Barkley?
I would probably aim a little higher, personally.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Like
mean,
Diggs?
I would rather go.
Would you?
I would rather go on the older side, personally.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I'm fine with doing that. So Diggs, Deontay Johnson might be available for
Yeah.
that type of price. Mike Evans plus. I mean, it used to be my
Right.
plus, and I think we're just gonna add a plus every offseason going forward now. So now it's two
Right.
pluses. Maybe it'll be three.
Wide
pluses
receiver
on.
12 for the record, right?
Yeah, he's done. He's done.
Yeah,
He's
gets
over.
washed up.
But yeah, so I would be going that angles because again, Barkley at 25-year-old season, we're on probably a 3-year trajectory here, and then who knows beyond that. So a 3-year trajectory, you should be comfortable going to 28, 29, that sort of zone at wide receiver, and almost view yourself as equal footing. So obviously there's a market value difference if the 29-year-old, if Mike Evans has a great season next year, he's had a lot of them, but if he has a great season, he's not going up. He's not doing anything. But
Right.
Barkley still has the possibility to, do that. But again, I wouldn't really use that as a measuring stick at this point. So I would be trying to can I get even or even escalate in my lineup? And then if I can get some accoutrement, I would do that as well. All right, we got one more here, and we're moving from Barkley, a concerning asset that people are maybe going to bail on, to we're going all the way up here. We're going to the penthouse. Jamar Chase, after setting franchise records, after probably single-handedly pulling dynasty teams to a championship in Week 17, now being traded. Along with Jalen Reagor, by the way. Reagor's just looking around in this elevator. It's like the John Travolta. What's going on here? Really? Me? You're making a 2 for 2 out of me? Okay, so Jamar Chase, Jalen Reagor for CeeDee Lamb and T. Higgins. We got a lot of heavy lifting here of the young wide receivers.
There's a lot to sort through in this. Can we just let's just take touchdowns out of this for a second. 77 receptions, 1,057 yards for Lamb. 79 receptions, 1,429 for Chase, where Chase distinguishes himself from Lamb in a major way. It's a 300 plus yard difference. That's a big difference. But also really the difference here is the 13 touchdowns to the 6 for Lamb. So that's a big difference. I expect that to come closer down. I was doing the math in an earlier recording session that we were doing. Jamar Chase, 2.42 points per target. That is a unsustainably high number. You expect that to come down. You see guys that are really good. That stat is highly fluky year to year. And you see it. I mean, just turn on the game this week and watch how he got loose on a couple of those touchdowns. Like that stuff doesn't happen normally, right?
I mean, that every week. Yeah, he might go a month and not do that once.
Right. And you see this pops up. AJ Brown is a classic example of this, right? AJ Brown did this early in his career where he really went to a super high efficiency and not a ton of volume, right?
And now where are we? Well, he's a really good player, nice young developing wide receiver, firmly in his prime, but they oscillate up and down. That's the way it works. The big time, like Mike Evans, I think he went from like 12 to 3 to 9 to like he was all over the place. It was a roller coaster ride. And what's the average number, just so people have a vantage point? You said 2.42. What's a typical wide receiver season or a typical, decent wide receiver seeing sample size kind of number on a year?
1.6 to 1.8 is a place I feel really comfortable with. When you look at some of the really good guys like Justin Jefferson's pushing about 1.9, 1.95. Again, you would expect that to come down a little bit, but I think, if you're I expect between 1.6 and 1.8 is I think a fair number. And it depends. Some of the higher volume guys get a little bit higher to that 1.8 range, but that would sort of be the sweet spot of which I would think most of the guys would. You should expect that's what you should expect. That's what you should expect.
When you start venturing to 2 and 2.2 and especially 2.4, that's when it starts getting a little nutty. And it's like, well, you can still think this is independent of assessing them as the player.
Right.
But to say that, and the other part is, I mean, it feeds into all this, but the yards per reception, the big play factor, the long touchdown factor, that feeds into all that stuff. The touchdown rate, it all comes together in points per target. So you have to be very, very careful because it's a long-term gain, and you say, well, I'm getting Jamar Chase. But at what price point and at what point in his career? And to be fair, this is a meteoric high point of trying to acquire him. And look what the cost was. T. Higgins is no slouch. CeeDee Lamb is no slouch. And I would say one thing, though. The shallower the format, the more I would like the installation of Jamar Chase and in the saving of the roster spot. But if you start starting 3 wide receivers, 28-man rosters, like you're locking in, because I'm one of the bigger T. Higgins, like through 2 years, I'm one of the bigger T. Higgins fans out there. And to say that this is overdone and shut and Jamar Chase will outproduce T. Higgins every year of their career together in Cincinnati, I would be on the other side of that bet. Like I would imagine that the market odds are just like, no, don't even talk to me. Don't at me, bro. I think would be the Young's moniker here. So I think T. Higgins is very good, and he's had 2 seasons of data points. So, and neither of us are the biggest CeeDee Lamb fans out there, but he's locked in with a big time offense. Michael Gallup, is he going to leave? At minimum, he's hurt. So a lot of variables there. And so CeeDee Lamb, we think is a little overrated, but there's a very high floor there. So you have 2 guys that I think are highly likely to produce 1, 2, 3 top 24 seasons. Top 12 is in play for both of them. So that's a lot of heavy lifting there in return for Chase.
Yeah, and I think the other way, just look at catches for a second. Jamar Chase, 79 catches. CeeDee Lamb on the season, 77 catches in 1 less game. And then T. Higgins, 74 catches in 2 less games, right? And I know that Chase is a rookie, and it's a really good rookie, undoubtedly. But when you look at that, right, you think, all right, well, one guy's most likely going to regress, right? He's either going to be the greatest of all time, or he's going to regress, right? I'm going to bet the regression side of that. And then you say, all right, like if either one of those guys pops up, all of a sudden, like they've got a 2-way go on him, right? In terms of potentially meeting or beating him. And again, we've talked about this. I think it was last week we talked about T. Higgins is the bet that if you want to sort of have a bet on Joe Burrow being excellent, they take it on T. Higgins at a huge discount on some of these other guys. So I really like that aspect of the trade, assuming it's not like an FFPC 20-man roster spot.
Yeah, and don't forget that there are offenses, and we saw it, I think, with Roddy and Julio in Atlanta. We've seen it on other occasions. I think Dallas,
Minnesota,
one of those environments, right? So it does occur if you get the right formula. And no
Tampa.
Disrespect to Tyler Boyd, but he's a distant third. They really don't have, no respect to friend of the show, CJ Uzama, but they also have a decent gap at tight end. So if this passing game funnels through those 2 wide receivers, they can both be top 12. They can both be very, very high. So to say that there's not upside for T. Higgins because of Jamar Chase is not an accurate statement as someone who looks at those passing games and how they're distributed and how they're attached and predictive by level of quarterback. So if you think Burrow is on that path at all, and he showed a lot of signs to close this year for sure, then again, generally you want to be on cheaper ancillary targets. I think Dawson Knox, in Buffalo would be an example of that, of like, get me somebody affordable in this offense. Like, oh, Stephon Diggs is out of control. He's super expensive. Well, let's go to someone cheaper, like Devin Singletary, like Dawson Knox. So you can find ancillary pieces of Darrell Williams, there. And obviously we didn't get there was no actual answer in terms of wide receivers with the Chiefs, but there could have been an answer. And that's why you make those sorts of bets and you kind of feel it out. But a lot of times, can you get the cheapest or one of the cheapest players, not necessarily the most expensive? All right. Do want to remind you, because we have the playoff push here, we're going to start having a lot of off-season news, and that means you want to be a part of the daily email update powered by Joe Bryant, collected with the news, the analysis that you need. And going through the NFL playoffs, going into NFL free agency, NFL draft material, you're going to want to be joined with more than 500,000 of your league mates, playing a league with 500,000 people. But point is, a lot of people on the list. And the easiest way, go to free email update at the top right of the Football Guys homepage and sign up. Make sure you are not left out with that daily email update from Joe Bryant. All right, we got some quotes from the Football Guys Dynasty Forum this week. Unless things get much better, Baker Mayfield will be destined to be a backup quarterback the rest of his career. It's getting hot under the collar for Baker Mayfield.
I mean, it hasn't been good, Chad.
What's the ratio of 2021 commercials seen with Baker Mayfield to 2022?
It's gonna be
20 to 1.
It's gonna be a sharp decline in ROI in the Mayfield family. I man, this is I think that we probably overstate the likely. Well, let's just take this back a second. So we knew coming into the season, when you looked at comps for him, when you looked at base rates, right? We're getting back into the offseason. We're going to be able to start doing these things. I wait until the end of the season, so post week 18, I'll sort of reset all my numbers on these things. But when you look at him coming into the season, his comps, which was guys coming into year 4 without a hit, being a top 10 guy, right? It's a less than 10% shot. Right. That's a low number. Right. And so we can like Baker, but you sort of have to reset him to that. And now you really get to a spot where there's not very many comps for guys being difference-making fantasy guys without a hit through 5 years. It's basically, I think Phillip Rivers hit in year 5 when he sat. I think that was when he did. And then you look at, it's really like Alex Smith going way, way out. But that's a rarity, right? That doesn't really happen all that much. And so that's a big time concern for him. I will say from a, just from a, they have him on the hook for next year, right? So that's one thing. And the other thing too is don't underestimate the willingness of the certainty of an offensive coach to say, I can remake this guy, right? And you see that with guys that have high pedigree. So that would sort of be I think he's going to get another shot of being a starter. Do I feel confident he's in a multi-year window at any point? Not until he signs a big multi-year guaranteed contract, right? So I think that's really the spot that I sit on him. If he's going to be valued outside of the top 25 at the position, I'm interested. If he's going to be involved in the being valued at the top 20 of the position, I'm out.
Yeah, not having a hit so far and being on the clear, 3 years in a row, basically like QB 24 or so, or outside, that's a real rough land, and he should be on a very short leash. And we even see with guys like Tua Tagovailoa, right? The team is looking at ways to improve their team, and more than 5 to 10 years ago, that includes quarterback. So that job security aspect is a big one. Now, Baker Mayfield, he strikes me, especially being 101 of an NFL draft, you get a lot of chances. So, Jameis Winston, for example, a lot of people, and now he was categorically through 4 or 5 years better than Baker Mayfield, but he was going to get more chances. He is going to get more chances. Jared Goff, people want to write him off, but again, he's been categorically better than Baker Mayfield to this point in his career, and he will get more chances. Baker will be the same way, though, maybe to a lesser degree, but he will be able to, at worst, yes, he'll be one of the better backups in the NFL. That's the baseline worst case. But he's going to, the problem is, it's sort of the Andy Dalton effect, right? You can say you'll do better at quarterback, but it's not like Taylor Heineke type situations of just oh yeah, that guy was going to get his degree, and he was, oh yeah, he wasn't even
a business
really
school, right?
Yeah. And so it's he, but so that story, that Kurt Warner story, doesn't really happen much at all. So to say that, oh yeah, we'll just find a guy. Okay, well, plenty of teams draft quarterbacks highly and still don't have a guy 2 years, 3 years later. So that's the real thing. They suck you in. The Nick Foles, again, all these quarterbacks that end up, give me another contract because I played well for that one stretch. And then you end up not being the guy. So I would say these are the types of profiles that can you collect? Is someone literally trying to give away Baker Mayfield? I think that's the key litmus test. Like you said, QB 25, it might be lower than that. He might drift into the 30s. And that's where, because let's imagine a startup draft. In 2 weeks, a startup draft occurs. He definitely is the stink, right? If someone waits and waits and waits, he would be a breath of fresh air if someone's I passed on quarterback way too much, or as much as I was planning to, and now he falls in my lap as a QB2. Huge discount version, or this is my QB3. That's some pretty decent profile for considering you waited as long as you did.
The other thing too, I would say about Mayfield is getting second chances, Jameis Winston, all that stuff. We're gonna look around and it could be as little as 2 weeks. But I mean, let's look around in February and March once we start getting retirements. If it's Roethlisberger, right? Heck, it could be Brady. It could be some of these other guys that once the dominoes start falling on some of these things, we're going to have more open jobs, and we always do, right? We have more. There's not enough franchise quarterbacks walking the face of the earth to fill 32 spots. There's just not.
There never are.
There never are. At any given moment, there's not 32 franchise quarterbacks walking the face of the earth. And so when you get to the point where you're like, all right, is it, if it's is the Saints have better options than a guy like Baker Mayfield? And heck, I mean, there's a lot of comps there between, probably most of it was size, but Drew Brees and Mayfield, right? You look around and all of a sudden, like, we can dump on Mayfield right now. And the market is doing that, but then you sort of look and you say, all right, is like, do we have a better option? Is Tyler Heineke a better option for Washington, right? Is Sam Darnold, is Cam Newton a better option, right? You start looking around and you say, all right, there's just not, right? So I do think he's going to get other opportunities. It's a scale of your ambitions thing, right? Like, what do you aspire to be? And can he win you a Super Bowl? I'm not sure. Can he start for you? Yeah. Right. That becomes a philosophical debate that you have to have. What are you trying to accomplish?
And you start having, again, the clock is going to start ticking, especially if next season doesn't go well for some of these 2021 rookies. So you have all these young quarterbacks as well that, what's their leash? Do you pair Baker Mayfield with a notable quarterback, not necessarily round 1, but maybe it's round 1, round 2 of this coming year's class? And now you have multiple options. I'm just in the bucket of, you take every opportunity you possibly can to fix quarterback and get better at quarterback. If that's a lot of draft pedigree over and over and over again, so be it. But until you have it, you don't have it, and you don't really have much of a chance.
You should advertise your services to Carolina. Can you help them out?
Right. If you need an every week start to boost your wide receiver core, there's a better chance DeAndre Hopkins gives you 2 to 3 years of at least wide receiver 2 to 3 production than a late first wide receiver making an impact.
I 100% agree with that. I went all in, and it mattered too, by the way. We talk about, does the decision matter? Yes, it did, in multiple games to get me to a championship. But I said, I have a window. I have elite quarterbacks. I have a window of contending assets that I'm not sure, is it going to be there in 18 months? Well, it's here right now, and let's do this thing. And it was Davante Adams. And I said, I had Mac Jones. I had a couple of picks. And I said, here, like, take them. I'll take Davante Adams, and I'll try and do this in a 2-year window with elite quarterbacks. I can worry about the rest of it. Give me a star. And I think, like, when you do that, right, if I'm going to fix a problem, I tend to, if it's at running back, I'll fix it with volume. If it's at another position, give me a star, right? Let's fix it. And we talk about, don't paper over a hole in the wall, put sheetrock.
I have to give my contending first in addition to what maybe I would have liked to pay in a vacuum. Okay. But now you look and you have a thunderous lineup as opposed to one where you're like, I added something, but I'm still like playing these in and out games of lineup decisions.
Right.
Yeah. Like you said,
I totally am a running back. Like but I have the ability, it's basically, it's that lineup it's Mahomes, it's Allen, Hill, Diggs, and Adams. Right. And then it's a bunch of guys around it, but it's a basketball lineup, right? I have 2 or 3 stars and a bunch of role players. Right. And that's,
you have 4 or 5 guys that play 40 plus minutes.
Right.
And you're like, I can piecemeal the rest. Can you get on the floor? Can you get dirty every once in a while? Can you dive for a loose ball? Can you get a couple free throws? Yeah.
Right. A hot shooter, right?
You just box out and run to the corner, my man. Run to the corner. That's your only job.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What's funny is I feel like I talk about running back probably 80% of the time in season. And then when I get to the off season, I talk about wide receiver and quarterback. I talk about all the other positions a lot more. It's weird how that, So off season, acquire, like you said, those auto start players at the other position, build your starting lineup, so to speak. And then, in season, you're just going to kind of figure it out.
Right.
You're going to figure out the rest. You're going to play with all your lineup spots.
Yeah.
And DeAndre Hopkins, there's a really good thread. It's Dynasty Buy Sell over there in the Shark Pool at Football Guys. And DeAndre Hopkins had there was probably 10, 15 comments. I just picked with this one. Yeah. But yeah, like the 29, 30, 31-year-old wide receiver, you've got to spam the offers across your leagues to find out what are the players and what are the GMs that are willing to sell, because these are not the attractive profiles in the offseason. These are the ones that they're getting older by the day. They're getting gray. I'm not setting lineups for 8 months. Like DeAndre Hopkins might retire by week 1 for all I know. Apparently, like every week is a month to him. So, and he's coming off an injury. It's the perfect storm, right? He's coming off. He wasn't his dominant self when he was playing that we remember. And then he was hurt. And now he's old and in the offseason. It really is. DeAndre Hopkins is the perfect storm of possible impact player acquisition. And like we said here, 2 or 3 years of, I'm going to start him. Like he feels like he's going to age so gracefully. Like in 3 years, he still might be in the top 30. Because he's already reformatting his game a la Larry Fitzgerald.
Right.
Of being more slot centric, sticky hands, running good routes, a lot of shorter routes. But Larry Fitzgerald, even at 34, 35 years old, was in lineups. In lineups. So just keep that in mind. Not every spot has to be about market value. Jeez.
Yeah.
Not everyone. I'm talking to myself from a few years ago. Right. Yeah. Mainly more than anybody. That was for me.
What is it?
That wasn't for the listeners. That was for me. Yeah, exactly. All right. If I can get anything for Rashaad Penny, I will take it.
What's anything? Like,
choose your own adventure, Jordan. What does that mean to you?
I mean, are we just throwing picks away? I mean,
moving up from 401 to 306.
Yeah, don't do that. I mean, just again, what do you
whacking them with the newspaper? You're like, no, don't do that. No.
Right. No. I guess the other thing too is like, all right, if you right, if you're going to sell them for a third, what's the odds that hits? Right. What's the odds that's relevant? That you don't.
He's a round 1 running back who was finally productive. We mentioned in the opening he had more than a third of his rushing yards. What if he goes on a quote unquote tear of health? And
don't use tear and health and Rashaad Penny and
Rashaad Penny. Yeah, that's right. If you say it 3 times, all of a sudden the monster's going to come out of the mirror.
a well stretched limber.
Yeah, exactly. The yoga infused. I will say Rashaad Penny firmly in his prime right now. Firmly in his prime. Dare I say Rashad Nickel? He's working his way up. So I will say this. You just saw what he could do. What do you mean by sell and get whatever you can get? Like, does this feel like, okay, what's the minimum? If you are deathly concerned and you held strictly because of profile, he finally came through and you're like, whew, I finished, he won me the third place game, or, I like what I saw to close the season, but you're still deathly afraid that he's going to go right back to being beleaguered by injuries and down the depth chart. Chris Carson's going to be back, all this bad stuff. So, and actually I think Penny's a free agent, but
he is. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a lot of concern. What is the minimum reasonable exit you would be trying to execute?
I mean, I wouldn't sell for anything less than a second. Right, because then you're putting yourself right back into, all right, I'm just going to hope a guy's going to be an injury away guy, right? I mean, that has less pedigree, that probably is less talented than
hoping
Penny.
For an injury away guy. And Penny, open air free agency, unless there's death concern about his durability, you would figure he'd be in that sort of environment himself, right?
Yeah.
He'll find a spot.
Right.
I mean,
and you could, and the other thing too is like, you have to, what I would think about a guy like Penny is look around for teams that need upside, right? That need a shot in the arm, right? That can afford to take a risk. Buffalo, for example, like again, you're looking for the type of bet that can somehow move the needle for you on a championship contender. Like if he comes in and is a difference maker for Buffalo, as much as running backs could matter, that could really help him. Teams like that might be interested in taking him on as a risk, especially with what we just saw, right? This isn't Rashaad Penny from 6 weeks ago who hadn't really played anything meaningful in a while, or done anything meaningful in a while. We're in sort of a new landscape of him. And, even if it's a 1 to 2 year deal, like if it's a James Conner deal, like you sold him for a third, right? James Conner was like a top 20 guy this year, right? It was the top 10 projection at certain points this year. Like,
density, right? I mean, yes. You're looking at players that in a vacuum, in the perfect storm, what can they do? You just saw it.
Right.
What was it? 3 top 10 weeks in a month. and including running back 1.
Yes.
So you don't give that away. There are a ton of injury away running backs that have very minimal shot at elite upside like that. They're just not that high end of a player. They would need such a glorious fall into the end zone from the 1 yard line opportunity in that window to do that. And so for Penny, I'll use Shawshank Redemption. If you're willing to come this far, maybe you'll come a little farther. So with Rashaad Penny, and we did this, and it was a lesser degree, I understand. But we did it with Leonard Fournette. Everyone's saying the guy can't stay healthy. And
until he did.
Derek asked also in the chat, I mean, a second and Penny for a first? I don't think that's possible. I don't think anyone in their sane, rational dynasty mind will give up a first for Rashaad Penny in a second. I mean, maybe if it's 202 and 110, but not an actual 1 round, or future second to first type upgrade. I think you're probably looking at if you want to pivot to a second and another strong injury, like an injury away candidate, I'm okay doing that.
I love that idea.
But so explore that, because a second gives you options, because you don't know what happens with Penny in free agency. I don't think a team is going to just anoint him the starter. I think it's going to be competitive. I think he's probably it's going to be ambiguous. Healthy and vibrant Rashaad Penny could take a job, but he probably doesn't go to a place that is just, oh, it's all you, bro. I'll just step back over here. I'll just lean back, at the dance, just watch everybody. It's probably not going to be that situation.
And there's not that many of those kicking around either.
So I do think if you can find insulation of a guy you feel confident, now it's January, so that's tough. It's tough to find that sort of running back injury away insulation because of free agency and just moving needles all over the place. But I would say if you can find a profile you like of someone like that in a second, that to me would be the move. And I don't know if the go ahead.
There's a couple more in here that are popping up. I think are good framing. Penny plus a small piece for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which is I think is an interesting one on potentially resetting the clock. And Penny and 201 for Zeke,
because Zeke is probably drifting to late first. So that's 201 and Penny. If Penny's worth a second, 201 and a second for Zeke. Yeah. So I would either try to move up like that or go sideways with the other running back profile I like, but maybe they have even a more checkered finish to the year for sure. Or maybe they didn't get an opportunity all year, from that injury away status and a second. And then you can use that second for however you want.
Yeah. I like the Zeke side of that deal, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, Zeke's going to be another one, right? I mean, he was already a deal last offseason. He falls, another couple rounds?
Yeah, what is he on the season? The last check I had was he was running back 6. I don't remember where
this just in, still good, still in his prime, still on a big time
running back 6 again.
Not going anywhere.
Yeah. Right.
So
46 receptions, 12 total touchdowns, 1,300 total yards. Yep. Look at that.
Yep. So how will you remember this year, Jordan? Kind of wrapping up 2021 here, and we're moving on, on to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati is the off season. So in season, off season, 2 completely different times of the year for us as analysts, and also just within our teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think this year it's a year that you look back on and you say, all right, a lot of the things that we talk about are right. I mean, some of the specific calls that we made, Trey Sermon hurts, right? I mean, Jalen Reagor hurts, like some of those things hurt. But when you look back at the overall strategy, which is a lot of running backs give you a lot of options, elite at other positions, and say volume can bring you home down the stretch of a fantasy season. And then you just turn and have some of the discussions that we've had where Devin Singletary and Rashaad Penny and Darrell Williams and Jarrett Patterson and, heck, Mike Davis, they're all playing big games down the stretch. Rex Burkhead. Right. I mean, just on and on and on of guys that cost nothing or cost very little. And in the right situation, you sort of know when to pull that trigger. Those things, right? That's a successful strategy. And that, this is something that we joked about a lot, right? Both on air and off air, all off season when people were talking up, needing elite running backs and going running back early. And we're just like, we'll see you in January and we'll have this discussion again. And it's the same formula, right? It's the same formula and it works. And I just think that people should take from that what it is. So, that would sort of be my, and the whole counting innings thing, right? Like you need to figure out a way to get through, however many, if you're trying to fill 2 running back spots through 14 weeks, it's 28, it's 28 weeks, right? You have to figure out a way to get through that. And you don't know in January when you're doing your startup in March who those are going to be. And even if you spend expensive, right? Like I would have presumed, and this is another good takeaway on need. I would have never thought in a million years sitting here this time last year that I would have been playing Zach Ertz over Saquon Barkley in a flex spot in a tight end premium league 2 days ago. Never would have thought that. But that team won, and that's what needed to happen. So again, just a reminder, if you're thinking you have a need now, what the year will do to that need, you don't know. It might actually be a strength. It might actually be much worse and make you totally not relevant. You don't know those things. So just continue to try and build strong teams.
Yeah. And I think to remind folks, because I kind of needed midway through the season to remind myself with a couple of my teams that you're not out of it until the clock tolls to 0. I had a team that fought their way back. I think I was 1-5 with my start. Might have been even 3. I think I was 3-7 as well, and just clawing and got some good performances in a 2 tight end with all these escalations out of Mark Andrews. But I had a good enough team and ended up going on a run, got some injury away running backs to work for me. Didn't have the greatest quarterbacks, but you know what? Made the playoffs, snuck in there, underdog, won 2 games, got to the finals, lost in the finals. But that's a successful season. And I think it's easy for folks to look at their team. It's really easy, I think, in January, especially if this year didn't go well for you. And you're thinking about, oh, well, let me load up on picks. Let me get younger. Let me do all of these things. When really, you might have had 2 or 3 players that got injured that they might not next year. But the point is, you don't know. You might have regression working your favor. And I think you need to, at every single step of the way, and I think I included this in one of my last Footballguys articles for the year of New Reality, that contend until you are proven not a contender. And it's impossible, as I just outlined. I was 1-5. 1-5, and I went on a run. 3-7, I went on a run. And so I think a lot of people at 1-5 would throw in and it's not that I wasn't trying to make some trades that made sense for my team, but they didn't work out. And how many times has someone tried? I've had teams before where I make a rebuilding, non-contending trade and I start winning games without them. We've seen it before in the NBA, right? Or Major League Baseball. They trade somebody away, or someone goes down, and all of a sudden they're playing better. They're playing better. How is this possible? So I think with Dynasty, your focus right now, January, early 2022, your focus has to be, how am I going to get better? And my goal is contending, and I will contend in week 1 and week 4 and week 7 of next year. And so for the next 9 to 10 months, my sole focus is trying to win and improve my team. And this whole multiple year rebuild thing, and I don't have the prettiest roster in the offseason, it's BS. You're going to go into week 1 and you're going to play the games anyway. So you might as well try to win them. That's a quote from someone at some point. But you've got to try to contend. It's January. I understand that. But contend now. Contend in January. Contend at your rookie draft. And contend all the way into September, October. And see what happens. See what happens. You're going to have overachieving teams. And it might not be pretty. But you know what? Someone's got to win it. And Adam Harstead does a great job of outlining, even if you're the number 1 team, you win total points, you're undefeated, you go all the way in, you get the bye, everything, you're still an underdog to win the whole thing when the playoffs start. Still take the field over you. So you can do all that work and be the prettiest team on paper and for 3+ months of the regular season and still not win. So why not be one of those scrappy teams? I had more teams this year than I ever thought not get a bye. And I know that's not a good thing historically to play the extra game, but I got in there. I won a couple games, got to the finals, and I took my shot and I did well. So get all the way home. Contend now. And I know you're not setting lineups for a while. That's independent of contending. Contend and use that as your focus. I don't care if you won 1 game this year. You can still do things to reconstruct your roster and use your picks as assets and get all the way home and contend in 2022. All right, so we discussed a lot, and it was backloaded here, but we many minutes ago talked about Saquon Barkley in the Dynasty trade market, Jamar Chase, Michael Thomas, Rashaad Penny. Who would have thought, as you said, a couple months ago, we would talk about Rashaad Penny on the closing show of the 2021 Dynasty season. I'm Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Dynasty leagues.
Send us out on top.
Maybe. Oh.